Stephen Colbert, Timothy Keller, the use of Twitter for Christians. That's what we're talking about today on the To Be the Church podcast. Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. The trio is back together. It's been a couple weeks. I'm Tyler. That's Andrew. That's Ben. Cody is running all things today. And so the Super Bowl was just 4 days ago.
Boo.
Yeah, we don't even want to talk about the outcome for two reasons. One, as we're recording this, it hasn't happened yet. But two, neither of our teams made it.
We hate all that stuff. Football doesn't exist.
Andrew,
Sports are dumb.
We were just talking a couple hours ago about how that day was just a really crappy day. Like
one of the worst.
Just all the way around.
Long story. Worst day of my life, but had not anything to do with football.
But that day did signify the end of our bet that people have been asking about.
Yes, Travis Kelce won. He's the best ever. We love him. Here's all our money. Oh, yeah.
You better be watching on YouTube right now because...
Wow.
Whenever you walked in with your the People's Tight End shirt,
which is actually a cool shirt,
check
not
this out.
a
Check this
weird,
out. Come
creepy. What?
It's just the front and back, all over the place. I was jealous of your shirt, and I googled Travis Kelce shirt, and there was one that popped up. I think I told you, maybe it was said on the podcast. There's like one that's like, I'm here for the drinks and Travis Kelce's butt.
Yeah.
And then this was the other one.
So I really would not be surprised if you made that. That looks like you made it. It looks like something that like Costco has, like you can put the pictures in and then like click I want the shirt, and then Costco printed that out for you. No? You actually got that somewhere else?
No, because if I would have done it, I would have done a lot more like recent pictures. This is older.
Oh,
These are older.
I could tell that. Yeah, that offended me.
He's like 25 here, you know? But
yeah.
Anyway, yes, I'm glad that
right.
this bet is over.
Yeah,
and I won the bet. But I'm wearing this shirt.
You won the bet twice. You won the bet. And then we doubled down for the postseason, which I was actually the double down. I didn't think necessarily that game for game Kittle would necessarily match him, but I was pretty confident that the Niners would go deeper than the Chiefs, just because of I don't know. I shouldn't have been that confident. The Chiefs, probably should have made the Super Bowl as well. But I was holding out to Travis, to Kittle having an extra week or an extra 2 weeks than Kelce did. But yeah, then we ended up both. Anyway, worst thing.
All right, let's
blame myself.
I blame you. I blame you. Yep.
All right, so this came in. This was okay. So there's some layers to this. What we got was a Tim Keller Facebook post about something that happened, and then a follow-up, but we're going to go back to what he was talking about originally. So this is this video here is from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert.
So a listener sent this in?
A listener sent this in and said, really, they just wanted our thoughts on all of this. And so there's the Colbert thing, there's Keller's explanation of the Colbert thing, and there's Keller's response to the Colbert thing. Yeah, here we go. All right, let's check this out.
I think something that your viewers really connect with in your comedy and your hosting skills, especially in the past few years, is how open and honest and authentic you are about the role your faith plays in your life.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I was wondering, is there any, does your faith and your comedy ever overlap? And does one ever win out?
I think ultimately, us all being mortal, the faith will win out at the end. But I certainly hope when I get to heaven, Jesus has a sense of humor. But I will say this. Someone was asking me earlier about this relates to faith, because my faith is involved with, I'm a Christian and a Catholic, and that's always connected to the idea of love and sacrifice being somehow related, and giving yourself to other people, and that death is not defeat, if you can see where I'm getting at there. Someone was asking me earlier, what movie did I really enjoy this year? And I said, well, I really like Belfast, which is Kenneth Branagh's story of his childhood. And one of the reasons I love it is that I'm Irish and Irish American, and it's such an Irish movie. And I think this is also a Catholic thing, because it's funny and it's sad, and it's funny about being sad. In the same way that sadness is like a little bit of an emotional death, but not a defeat if you can find a way to laugh about it. Because that laughter keeps you from having fear of it. And fear is the thing that keeps you from turning to evil devices to save you from the sadness. As Robert Hayden said, we must not be frightened or cajoled into accepting evil as our deliverance from evil. We must keep struggling to maintain our humanity, though monsters of abstraction threaten and police us. So if there's some relationship between my faith and my comedy, it's that no matter what happens, you are never defeated. You must understand and see this in the light of eternity and find some way to love and laugh with each other.
Wow. Stephen Colbert, everybody.
All right. So there's that. Stephen Colbert was asked.
So
about
that was
faith
the
and
original
comedy.
video. And
then let's see here.
Tim Keller tweeted. I can read it.
Okay.
So Keller then tweeted, and I had seen this from someone else who I think had probably gotten it from Keller, but other guys like Anthony Bradley, King's College professor, had tweeted it as well, and a number of other guys. And then I saw some like friends of mine that are just pastors at churches, not super Christian famous, but just regular dudes who had like sent it out on social media as well. So anyway, Keller said, "This is a brilliant example of how to be a Christian in the public square. Notice the witness, but in a form the culture can handle. We should desire to have more Christians in these spaces and to give them grace as they operate." So that was Keller's thing, and then he had attached the video to that tweet.
So with that, I have the Facebook version open here, which is a little more long form than Twitter.
Oh, okay.
And he goes on to say, please do not make the error. If you cite person X at all, you must answer for everything person X ever did or said. That is not fair. I'm merely saying this is a winsome way to answer the question, to answer this question that we should desire to emulate.
Okay.
So it's probably the tweet thread or whatever, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so that's Keller's thing, and then he posted this in response to the comments. So I assume there's obviously there were negative comments about it.
Yeah, well, it kind of blew up. There was a huge,
What was the basis of those negative comments?
It's the normal stuff that happens with stuff like that. So you get the, we should do a whole episode just on like Twitter explosions and then how they work, because you get something like that, and then you get people who are going to respond to it by criticizing, Keller posting that, criticizing like his angle on it. And then what you get is the Kellerites, who are not necessarily Kellerites, but they're people who want to defend Keller, who then will kind of go back at those people. And then you get all of these people who criticize Keller, who then will come back at those people. And then you usually have a fair bit of people in the middle who will be like, we should love each other, or like, and then who will lecture all the people in the thread about like being more Christian and da-da-da-da-da. And then you'll have other people at other angles. And so it was kind of funny because when I saw Keller's response to the responses to him, which we can then go into there, I don't know. I don't know when I should share my take on all of it, but maybe we should go into his response to it, because it was the response was funny. Because anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting. I just would like to know what the big explosion was about.
Yeah,
based on, was it like Colbert's pro-abortion and that, or is that
basically it's people to the right of Keller, people more conservative than Keller, that I would say politically more conservative than Keller. Theologically, they'd be people that would probably be aligned with a lot of Keller's stuff. Maybe not Presbyterians, maybe more Baptist, but at the same time, they'd be kind of in the Reformed camp and those kind of things. Conservative theologically, they would agree with Keller on sexual ethics and those kind of things. But they would be politically to the right of where Keller tends to be. He tends to lean a little left on some of those cultural political issues, which again he would probably come back to and say is he says in his books like he's too conservative for his liberal friends and too liberal for his conservatives. And so Keller kind of plays that moderate middle there. But the criticism, so the main criticisms of it were like, have you ever watched Stephen Colbert other than this clip, kind of a thing? Because it's like, that were the main criticisms of it. And yet Keller didn't take, he then responds with a long thing on contextualization, which is kind of like, I don't think that was the point of people's criticism, was like not understanding contextualization. It was more a matter of like there were threads, and I mean this one was like blowing up my Twitter timeline for probably 3 or 4 days. There were threads of people sharing stuff that Colbert has had on his show. And I'm not talking about a vulgar joke. I'm talking about specific vulgarity related to Jesus that he's had on his show. I mean, he's got, I don't know, how long has he been on the air? A decade, years, 20 years. Yeah. So stuff that he said about Christ on his show, that's just, pretty gross, dark, whatever. Right. And not even just his stance on different things, but I think the criticism is like, you're putting Colbert forward as a faithful Christian witness simply because he's saying he's a Christian. But if you look at his public witness, it's not the witness of a Christian, right? And so not because he is a registered Democrat, or I don't even know who he votes for. I have an idea because I see who he dances with, politicians he dances with. But I think that's the criticism, is like, hey, there's a bigger narrative here, and it's outside of this one little clip. A guy that says he's a Christian and then is in those spaces, which I would agree with Keller that we should have Christians in those spaces doing those kinds of things. But when you look at what Colbert brings to the table on a night-to-night basis in terms of the types of stuff he says, and even the types of stuff he has said over the years, I mean, it's on tape. You can look through all these different clips of the stuff he said about Christ and the different things. He said some stuff about suffering as well and different things, and people looking at that and go, okay, is Colbert, but it's like, he's a self-proclaimed Christian, but I think when he's being put forward as like one of probably, I would say in our world today, at least in America, probably one of the top 10 most influential Christian pastors. Obviously he's retired now, but authors and pastors in someone like Keller, through any denomination, right, or any tribe. I mean, Keller's got to be in the top 10 in terms of his influence worldwide from American Christianity. And when he's put forward by a guy like Keller as like, this is a faithful Christian witness and we should emulate these kinds of things, I think that's where people are just like, wait, what? But then the criticism to the people criticizing Keller is like, you guys are just worried about politics and because you don't like Colbert's politics. And so I think I was looking at all of it and just kind of, I'm just reading through it all and just kind of like, oh, this is another one of these classic deals. But Keller's response, you got the whole contextualization thing, which again might be worthy reading that.
Let's read part of it at least. The recent post I made about Stephen Colbert's partial answer about his faith and the ensuing comments has shown me American Christians still have a long way to go on understanding Colossians 4, 5, and 6, how to be, quote, wise in the way you act toward outsiders. This is called contextualization. What is contextualization? It's adapting your message to be understandable and compelling to particular hearers without compromising the truth in any way. Why contextualize? First, because everyone already does it. As soon as you choose a language to speak in, and vocabulary and illustrations and arguments, you are adapting to some human hearers more than others. If you don't become conscious of how you are contextualizing, which is inevitable, you won't contextualize well. Second, because Paul contextualizes in his speeches. Example, how he presents the Bible to Bible believers in Acts 13, blue-collar pagans in Acts 14, educated pagans in Acts 17. Third, because the biblical writers contextualized. See John's use of Greek philosophies, logos in John 1. See the use of the Hittite suzerain treaty form in the book of Deuteronomy. See Paul's contextualization of the gospel to Greek and Jewish cultural narratives in 1 Corinthians 1. Fourth, because Paul calls us to contextualization without compromise in 1 Corinthians 9, 19 through 23. Fifth, because the incarnation itself was a kind of contextualizing so we could understand the Word made flesh. Sixth, keep in mind you can't and shouldn't say everything every time when bearing a public witness to your faith. In Acts 17, Paul spoke of judgment, but not of the cross or of how to get forgiveness. So it wasn't a full gospel presentation. It was laying a foundation for talking to people later. Unless Christians are completely going to pull themselves out of the public square, we will need to contextualize. Let's do so well.
Yeah. And I mean, that's literally like a couple of paragraphs. It sounds like out of Center Church. I mean, it's not, I don't think there's anything there on contextualization that we would disagree with at all. It's all sound stuff. When I look at it in light of what the actual back and forth was on Twitter, I'm like, nobody was wondering about contextualization. Like, it's the critique, I think. And again, some of the critiques are less, it's Twitter, so people say stupid stuff all the time, but some of the critiques are less articulate than others. But I remember reading through the contextualization stuff. It's just like, I totally agree with all that. But again, I think the issue here is actually people saying, Colbert's not a Christian. And then others being like, he's the greatest example of Christianity. So, or not, and obviously it was a limited clip. And I think Keller said on the Facebook, the lawn forum, this doesn't mean you're necessarily advocating everything they've ever said or done. But I'm kind of laughing when you read through the contextualization thing, because I remember following up on one of those threads and reading below it, and there was people who were sharing clip after clip of stuff that Colbert has said on the air, like just like that clip on with that gal there on his faith, that again about Christ or about the Bible or about whatever else, and it's like, here's another good contextualization, which is like, here's him contextualizing his, but again, like his witness hour after hour, day after day, is not the witness of a believer in terms of when you watch these things. So the question is, like, is that a responsible thing to claim? So one other side thing, and I don't want to talk the whole time here, but what's funny is when I was reading through this controversy like a week ago, I was sick for the last few weeks. I'm at home, I'm just reading, and there was two books that I was reading at the same time while I'm looking at all that. And one was written in 1923, the other in 1968. The first one I read was The God Who Is There by Francis Schaeffer, who was like, if you talk about like the contextualization, I mean, a lot of stuff that a Keller in his generation would have learned would have been from a Schaeffer, right? In terms of contextualizing our faith and being a good witness and apologetics in the public square. And so I'm reading The God Who Is There. And then the second book is J. Gresham Machen, Christianity and Liberalism, which I think for this discussion is probably the more apt example, because Christianity and liberalism was basically in 1923, it's kind of the not necessarily the birth, but in American Christianity, it's the height of the beginning of like the kind of the debates of fundamentalist Christians versus like liberal Christianity. And when you look back, it was written 100 years ago, and the stuff Machen says in that book, it's like prophetic to this moment. Like you're just like, whoa, the types of the way he was describing quote unquote Christian liberalism in terms of its angle on God, on Christ, on those things. And Schaeffer says the same stuff in 1968, where there is language used, and Schaeffer talks about this a lot in The God Who Is There. There's language used that doesn't mean what you think it means, meaning the term God is used, or the term Christianity is used, or the term Christian is used, and they're not defined in the way that the scriptures define them. They're defined in the way that the culture defines them, right? And so Colbert to me is a great example of that, to where he holds and is very public about his views on a number of things that are not biblical, that you wouldn't define as Christian views. And Christian, biblical stances, and yet at the same time he holds and proclaims that he is a Christian, living these things out in the public square and very vocal with his faith or whatever. And so it's again, this is a century after this stuff was really beginning to take root in America, and I think we see it today in the revisionist movements and in the redefinition of terms like God, Christ, Christian, and everything else. And so I don't know. So I think my take on it is like we've said on this podcast before, read a ton of Keller stuff over the years, benefited greatly by the stuff he's written. I went to seminary with one of his sons, and he went to Gordon Conwell years before I was there. I mean, Keller, is obviously someone that we have a lot of respect for and have over the years. Things like this, I think, though, I look at it and I go like, yeah, I don't think the problem you're thinking is quite there. But then Keller's trying to be charitable, and he says this stuff on contextualization, and I don't know. I just look at it and I'm like, I would think Keller knows Colbert, I mean, maybe he even knows him in New York, but I don't know. I think it's an interesting deal.
After the Chiefs lost, I deleted Twitter from my phone and Facebook from my phone.
So you missed all this?
In anger. Yeah. No, I didn't miss it because I still have it on my desktop. So I saw, but I didn't have a timeline of multiple days where I'm like, oh, wow.
Laying there in bed, being able to do
the only
tweet.
there were two critiques of this that I saw, and one was like, have you heard what he said over the years? And I think it was a abortion quote or something like that. And the second was, and maybe this is what Keller's speaking more to, was I didn't hear the gospel in that answer.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that if that's the critique, the contextualization thing like makes a little more sense, you know? And so,
and I think that critique is less understands what Keller was trying to say. And then, but I do think that is the critique that Keller was responding to, which is,
and to that, like I would, you know, if somebody were like, well, did you hear the gospel in that at all? You know, I would probably say, check out Keller's response there on contextualization, you know, stuff like that. Ben, you came into this conversation without any timeline.
Yeah, I didn't know any of this.
Yeah, so tell us how we should feel.
Ben, teach us the way.
So I have a couple thoughts just listening. I'd like to give Keller the benefit of the doubt, just because I like to be given the benefit of the doubt. It seems to me like when I hear that first tweet, I think he's saying like, this is illustrative of how someone of faith can engage a culture that doesn't have faith. In the same way, like you could see a scene in a movie that's not even real people, but like that illustrates a winsome way to engage people who maybe disagree with you.
Yeah.
And to that, it's like, I agree. Now, that's not saying I think Colbert's a genuine regenerate believer or anything, but like I do from that little clip, if you can kind of consume it in a vacuum, like I think he did answer her question winsomely, and like whether he's a genuine believer or not, he had some sort of reputation that led her to like want to ask about that. And I think similarly, we as Christians should live in such a way that people are curious about how what we believe impacts how we live. So I think that would be a thought. My other thought would be like, why do we care so much? Like, this is my main thought.
Here's why we care, man. We care because we have 20 to 30 minutes to fill every Friday.
You got to care for at least 25 minutes on the To Be
Like
Church
not
podcast.
knowing of any of this. And I also don't have Twitter. I do have a burner Twitter that I only follow 49ers and Kings things on. I'm purposely not going to follow anyone in evangelicalism. Because like, I don't really care what Stephen Colbert thinks. I like Keller's books and stuff. I don't care what he tweets. Like, because not hearing of this, and I'm trying to pastor this small church in Southwest Washington, like I got enough to worry about than like, what's Keller saying? What's Colbert saying? Like, who cares? Like,
that's so good.
And I haven't heard from my people. If my people were like, oh, can you believe this? Like, and they want my pastoral guidance, but like, I haven't heard anyone mentioning this. It's like, I'm envious of the days when it's like we didn't have our favorite authors tweeting every day. Cause it's just like, I mean, I wonder what Spurgeon would have tweeted. Like, or like what, I mean, can you imagine Luther with a Twitter? Like he already like got in trouble with his mouth. Like, I don't know. To me, it doesn't really scratch any sort of itch that I have. So it's just like, cool. Like it's interesting. Again, I'm not saying we shouldn't worry about these things like contextualization or evangelism or those things, but it's like, I don't know. There's so much more important things to, this kind of fits to that wisdom pyramid book, right? Or we're getting so much from like maybe the wrong things. Like
is it McCracken, right?
Yeah.
Let's focus more on being influenced by other things than social media. But
Brett McCracken's Twitter game's been pretty good lately. I've been following him.
Yeah, I like him. I actually just went to his Twitter. I bet he talked about this in some.
Did he? I don't know if he did.
We'll find out. But anyway, we won't find out on this podcast.
Wait, we have to know. We have to know if he talked about this.
Isn't that exactly what you just said that we don't need to know?
I know, dude. And that's there are several times, and I think even when we were in my office before we were recording here, like just being sick and spending more time on Twitter because I'm like, I can't really do anything. I'm laying around. It's like I got to this point after being sick for like 2 weeks basically that I was like, you get so tired of like the headlines and the sound bites, and then the way that people operate in those spheres. And it's the question would be like, if Ty, what cultural issues, if you're going to be someone who tweets, like what cultural issues are you going to like touch versus not? Like what I tend to stay, and it's funny because when I look at like even tweeting or sharing something on Facebook or those things, like it's gotten for me less and less over the years that I actually share anything. I mainly use Twitter for like, well, you said like sports stuff, but I mainly use it for news and sports. And I do follow a bunch of evangelical people and kind of right and left and political stuff on the different sides, because I like to remain specifically to kind of like, even with stuff like this, to be able to kind of see how the different sides are responding to each other and what those things are, and not claiming neutrality in those things. But it's few and far between where I feel like I need or should log in on those things, you know?
I just don't.
Yeah.
Like ever. Like there's no good reason to.
Yeah.
It's like,
I just feel like time is much better spent. Like we have dozens of opportunities every week to sit across from people like over coffee and talk about the scriptures and life and like be engaged. But like what's happening on Twitter doesn't, like, we can do this with the scriptures and like, I don't know. I feel like that's been brought into it, and it's just like, I don't know. Time would be much like someone should pick up Manchin and Schaefer, read that for an hour. That hour is going to be much better spent than scrolling through Twitter and reading all the fights. And I'm not saying that's bad if you want to do that, but it's like, while you were talking, one that I read is one of Packer's earliest books. I think it was in the 60s, Fundamentalism and the Word of God. And he's responding to liberalism, saying, because it ultimately comes down to where's our authority, and it's in Scripture. But read stuff like that so that you're thinking through these things and you're living it out, but you're not like, it's not all just based on Twitter or things you're hearing or, and as we've talked about before, I think we should be okay with being like, I might not agree with everything that Tim Keller says politically or anything, but like, I still am very proud to like say some of his books have been really impactful on my life, and I recommend them to others. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of good stuff that we could be spending our time with instead of Twitter.
Do you know what one really good use of Twitter is? Sending us your questions @To Be the Church. You can send them in there on Twitter, on Facebook. That was quite the segue, wasn't it? Wow.
That was a great segue.
You can also do it podcast @toBeTheChurch.com. We'd love to hear from you and talk for 25 to 30 minutes about something that doesn't affect us. Have a good one.